An ostomy consists of a connection between the intestinal tract and your abdominal wall. And when we're talking about an ostomy, we are generally talking about a colostomy, which consists of bringing out a piece of the colon to the abdominal wall, where it's anchored to the abdominal wall, and we put an ostomy appliance or a bag on the skin to collect the stool, gas, and waste. An ileostomy, which is another type of ostomy, consists of bringing out the small bowel, what we call the terminal ileum, and bringing it out to the abdominal wall, usually over on the right side of the belly, again to perform the same function, to collect stool and gas that's coming out of the intestinal tract. We use an ostomy when we need to divert the stool for some reason. So rather than having stool and gas coming out of your rectum, which is the way you were born, it's going to come out and empty into a bag that is attached to your abdominal wall. And again, they're done for a number of reasons. Probably the most common reason for us to do a colostomy occurs in patients who have very low-lying rectal cancers, where we have to take out most, if not all, of the rectum, and therefore that necessitates bringing the bowel, which is it's a tubular organ, bringing it out through the abdominal wall so that we can collect waste in the bag. We do the same thing with the terminal ileum. It's probably most often used in people who have a rectal cancer, where we take out a lot of the rectum and splice it back together. But then to protect that splice while it heals, we'll bring out a loop of the small bowel, the terminal ileum, on the right side of the belly, again to collect the waste and the gas, so that it does not go down to the rectum. And our feeling is that gives the rectum a little time to heal before we take that ostomy down. So basically an ostomy is a connection between your intestinal tract and the skin and abdominal wall. We use ostomies when we have a need to divert the stool away from the rectum. And that can be for a number of reasons. The most common reason being, I would say the most common reason would be in patients who have had most, if not all, of their rectum removed for cancer. And the ostomy consists of bringing a piece of the colon, in that case, or the small bowel, up through the abdominal wall and attaching it to the skin, where we then apply an appliance like this, an ostomy bag, to collect the stool and the gas. And I mentioned colostomy and ileostomy separately because a colostomy is made by bringing out the end of the colon. An ileostomy is made by bringing out the end or loop of the terminal ileum, which is the small intestine. So they're used to divert the stool for a variety of reasons. As I mentioned, one of the more common reasons that we use one is that we have to take out the rectum as a result of rectal cancer. Obviously, with no rectum, you then need a colostomy to collect the waste. But we also use ileostomies, and we can use those if we have to take out the whole colon for a particular type of disease. Or let's say we've taken out a good part of the rectum and we've done an anastomosis, which means we splice the bowel back together, but we want to protect that for a few weeks as it heals. We will then bring out an ileostomy in that case so that the stool and gas comes out into, again, an ostomy appliance, a little bag attached to the skin, so that our feeling is it protects the rectum and allows it to fully heal before we then take that ostomy down. In other words, we get rid of it. We fix the bowel and drop it back down into the abdominal cavity. A simple answer to that, I like to tell patients, is no. And I bring this up with almost any patient who's going to have an ostomy, because that's obviously a concern for a patient. And one of the things I point out to people who are going to have an ostomy is that if we're doing an ostomy, we're doing it for a reason. And generally speaking, you are doing it because you do not have a functioning rectum. So whether that be from cancer or whether it be for another cause, you're better off having an ostomy than having the disease. And I make a point to patients that you can do whatever you're comfortable doing with an ostomy. And to give you an example, you can scuba dive. There have been professional and college football players with ostomies, and I bring those things up because those are extremes in life. So if your thing is walking or riding a bike or gardening, walking your dog, you want to lift weights, those things can all be done with an ostomy. So most people, again, you can never say always and never say never in medicine. Most people are going to be able to function very, very, very nicely, and they're going to be able to carry out their normal daily routine. A really good friend of mine that I met a number of years ago who has an ileostomy as a result of having ulcerative colitis, he chose to have the ileostomy rather than a J-pouch. And some of you may or may not know what a J-pouch is, but that's something that can be done to make an artificial rectum. But it has problems, and this fellow was very active, ran triathlons, played goalie on an adult ice hockey team, still does, as a matter of fact. Now he's in his 70s, and he chose to have the ileostomy because he knew he could play hockey with the ileostomy, and he was afraid that with the J-pouch he'd be pooping his pants right in the middle of the game. And so I have him talk to a lot of patients if they're facing the possibility of an ostomy, so that he can kind of tell them about his life and how he kind of lived a life of extremes, running triathlons and playing ice hockey, and was able to do all of that perfectly well with an ileostomy. The biggest challenge of having an ostomy is that you're pooping from a different place. Ostomies are normally put in the kind of the left lower quadrant if you have a colostomy, and sorry if you can't see what I'm pointing to, I realize I'm behind my desk, or in the right lower quadrant if you have an ileostomy. And so the challenges are a result of you're going to the bathroom from a different location, and the stool and waste is going to come out and empty into a bag like this. Now, there are many different types of bags and appliances, but it's going to be attached to your abdominal wall, and you're going to collect stool here. So you can probably use your imagination and think of all the different things that can happen. I know I mentioned before that people can pretty much carry on a normal lifestyle with an ostomy, but you've got to make some adaptations. Obviously, the bag is going to fill up, and it fills up and needs to be empty. So you've got the whole issue of going to the bathroom or going into a bathroom and emptying the bag, and most of these bags are reusable, and perhaps rinsing it out and putting it back on. That's different, and you have to learn to do that. Most people will end up, when we talk about colostomies, they will end up with a bowel pattern that's fairly similar to what they had before they had their surgery. So if you went once a day, you're going to tend to go once a day. Some people, bowel pattern's not that predictable. One of the things we can have patients do with colostomies is we can teach them to irrigate, which is like giving themselves an enema through their ostomy, which stimulates their bowel to empty. And a lot of people, 80% of people in fact, find that to be very successful in controlling their bowel movements. They'll do that, say, in the morning, and then they don't go again until the next day when they irrigate again. So that sort of helps alleviate that issue of, you're sitting in public and all of a sudden, your bag's full and you got to run and empty the bag. Obviously, odor can be a problem. I know, not from personal experience, but from the patients I've taken care of, there are a variety of products that help with that, from stuff you put in the bag to filters. This bag has a little filter on it. There's a little charcoal filter on here that helps deodorize the gas that comes out of there. Just the sound of passing gas can occur, and of course that could happen to any of us that maybe heard in the movie theater just having a regular fart. But it certainly can occur with this that people they'll hear the sound of gas coming out of the ostomy. The other problems with this is that some folks have issues with getting the appliance to adhere to the skin, with it popping off when they don't want to, and obviously that's a heck of a problem to have, especially out in public. Fortunately, in this day and age, I'm showing you a very simple design of an ostomy bag. There are a number of different ways to attach this appliance to the skin, and although that certainly could happen at any time, it's much less likely now to happen to patients because of some of the appliance mechanisms that are used to fix this to the skin. And in fact, most people use a reusable bag that will, as you can see, works like a Tupperware container, where it snaps in place. It fits on there pretty snugly, and that way they can pop it off, empty, rinse, and put it back on. and they can actually keep the adhesive that's on the skin, keep it on there for a number of days before they have to replace it. Another problem we can have is if you have an appliance that's not fitting well. Stool is an irritant, and anybody who's had diarrhea knows that their bottom will start burning because stool is alkaline, and just the cleaning and wiping or the irritation effect of the stool can get the skin can cause the skin to break out and to break down the skin and cause quite a bit of irritation. Fortunately, with the newer appliances, that's less of a problem. And there are some specific measures I won't go into now, but there are measures that either your physician or ostomy nurses are fantastic at helping patients both prevent and treat those problems when they occur. Well, the simple answer is you don't have to watch what you eat. It's a concern many patients have, and I think there's a lot of misconception out there. And I say that because having taken care of a lot of patients with ostomies, I know that they have a lot of reservations about eating certain foods. Some patients may find that certain foods bother them, and you can kind of say that for almost anybody. People who've never had any GI problems at all. My general consensus when it comes to dealing with patients like that is that if something bothers you, don't eat it. But I never put any food restrictions on my patients, because with a colostomy or with an ileostomy, either one, the absorptive capacity of the bowel is still there. The ability of the bowel to absorb nutrients is still there. The food is broken down by the time it gets down to the terminal ileum, to the last part of your small bowel. And so it's of a consistency that it's going to be able to pass through an ostomy. And the same can be said for a colostomy. In fact, the stool that comes out of a colostomy generally has about the same consistency as your normal stool would have, and the opening in the abdominal wall is large enough, and I'm literally showing you with my hand because that's about how big the ostomy is, that it will easily allow passage of stool. So most people can eat what they want, but as with any other thing in life, no two people are the same. And my advice to patients is if you notice things bother you or change your stool pattern, which can happen to any of us, then don't eat it. But otherwise, I don't put any specific restrictions on people. No, you will not always have a permanent ostomy. In fact, for the majority of colon cancer cases that we do, a patient does not have an ostomy at all. Where colostomies become colostomies or ileostomies, where we use those, are in situations where people have cancer of the rectum. And if the rectum has to be completely removed, you will then have a permanent colostomy because you do not have a rectum or the muscles that are required to control your bowel movements. But in those situations where we are simply trying to protect the rectum while it heals after a surgery and we put the bowel back together, when we do a colostomy in that situation, it is meant to be temporary. We sometimes use ileostomies for the same purpose, to protect the rectum after a person has undergone a partial removal of the rectum for cancer. So we can use a colostomy or an ileostomy interchangeably. Quite often that's up to the surgeon's comfort level with doing either one. In more recent years, those of us who do colorectals especially tend to use more diverting ileostomies, which can be taken down much easier once you're ready to restore the continuity of the bowel. So the short answer is no, not all ostomies are permanent. Many of them are designed to be temporary. But if a patient loses the entire rectum as a result of cancer, those ostomies, and in fact that case that would be a colostomy, are going to be permanent.